Hello, I'm Mr. Gutierrez. This will be the first of many videos to come that you will use in APUS history. The purpose is that these videos complement what you're already reading in the book. And with the book, you're going to use these as the backbone in terms of the content and what we will discuss in the class. Lots of times in class, I'll ask you questions, I'll give you documents to analyze, and you're required to really draw upon your reading, your content knowledge, to use that in your analysis in this history class. Um, One thing I really want to bring home to you, though, with these videos is trying to give you a second layer of understanding to help you connect the dots a little bit more from what you read in the book, to give an opportunity to digest this information a little bit more. The other thing I would like to do in these videos is to start off with an idea of what am I trying to get at and keep it concise in terms of these objectives. So this first one is explain how and why various native populations of the period before European contact interacted with the natural environment in North America. So the idea is before 1492, what were Native Americans doing in North and South America prior to Columbus' arrival, prior to the New World and the Old World interacting with each other? The other thing is I really want to have a thesis statement. I really want to have an argument and model for you an argument being made and then supporting that argument with facts and evidence and analysis. Not only do you have to do that in class, not only do you have to verbalize that, not only you have to write about that, but you're going to have to be asked to answer essay questions with a thesis statement, and the following essay is just your support for that thesis. So at the very least, I need to model for you what that means. So here's my thesis statement for this presentation. Before 1492, the continents in North and South America were peopled with diverse cultures and societies. Wonders were created by various native civilizations that rivaled their contemporary Eurasia or African counterparts. So one of my goals for this video is to really demonstrate for you that Native American society and culture before Columbus and even after Columbus as well was varied, was dynamic. There's not one group, it's many different groups. So let's get into it. First question is, how did North and South America get peopled? How did people get here? Archaeologists about 15, 16, 60,000 years ago believe that during the Ice Age, the water levels were lowered. They were lowered enough between Asia, or what we know as Russia today, and Alaska. You had this Bering Strait, this land bridge where people could come over. Later on, about 14,000 years ago, the glaciers melted. And when they melted, they submerged that land that we know as the Bering Strait. When the ocean's levels rose, that land bridge was no longer there. So when the Ice Age ended and the oceans began to rise, the land bridge went away. Why did people come? They were pursuing food. This is what we believe early man coming into North America and South America doing, which was food. Large fauna was what they hunted, the woolly mammoth. You have the woolly rhinoceros. You have the giant sloth here depicted in this image. And this is what man was eating. But by 9,000 years ago, especially at the end of the Ice Age, this large fauna became disappearing. It became extinct. Some people believe that man actually exacerbated it and increased the pace in which these animals were disappearing. So now you had a food crisis. This forced early Native Americans or early man in North and South America to develop a new idea to help sustain them, and that was farming. Farming really developed in what we know as Mexico today and what we know as Peru today in the Andes. What did they grow? They grew crops like maize, what we know as corn today, squash, and beans. And the amount of agriculture that occurred in North and South America, especially areas like Peru and Mexico today, allowed for large civilizations, large populations to develop. At the time of contact, you have three major civilizations that were at the contemporary of Columbus in 1492. One group were the Aztecs. At the time of the contact, the Aztecs had a huge civilization, huge empire, and a major city known as Tenochtitlan, what we call Mexico City today. In Peru, you had the Incas. The Incas built extensive roads and bridges, 2,000 miles network of roads and bridges in their empire. And actually, in North America, what we know the Mississippi River Valley today, you have these extensive trade routes by the Moundbuilders of the Mississippi River Valley, which actually had large populations. And we have evidence of these mounds that they built even to today. Let's discuss what we know as the United States today in terms of the geography. There were hundreds of different Native American cultures that existed when what we know the United States as today. In the western regions, you had the Hopi and Zuni. They built planned towns like the Canyon de Chelly in Arizona. You have the Pueblo Indians. They specialize in desert farming. Corn, beans, and cotton were something also that they grew. You have the Indians of the Pacific Coast. They had small independent villages. They specialized in hunting and fishing. They hunted sea mammals. They gathered wild plants and nuts to sustain their diet. And then you also had the Western Indians on the Great Plains. And the thing to understand about the Native Americans on the Great Plains at this time was that they didn't really have horses. Remember, horses didn't come around until after 1492. So they were agricultural communities that hunted herds of buffalo to sustain themselves. And when the horse came into their possession, they sometimes or pretty much abandoned the agricultural communities in pursuit of hunting buffalo. You'll also have Native Americans like the Iroquois Confederacy in the northeastern part of the United States. And these Native Americans will be important, especially when we talk about the American Revolution and the French. They're going to ally with groups that will benefit them. They're going to ally with different Europeans that they feel will benefit them and maybe strengthen them against other Native Americans. You also have Native Americans of the Southeast, and Native Americans like the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Iroquois, and the Seminole people. If you recall from 8th grade, these Native Americans are the ones that are going to be removed from their land on the Trail of Tears. So we're going to recall back to these groups later on. Despite these regional differences, you had some surprising similarities between these different groups of Native Americans. And this is going to be important because when we talk about Native American and European cultures colliding, there's going to be some really big cultural differences that occur with these groups. One aspect is property. Many Native Americans did not really feel that property or land should have private ownership. Tribes claimed specific areas, but land didn't necessarily belong to one individual. Big reason for that is the land was the basis for the economy, was the basis of their survival. So this was a common resource shared by all Native Americans. So they didn't have a concept of private ownership of land like Europeans have. In terms of religion, the religions varied, but many of the religions harness the idea of supernatural forces to serve the interests of man, to call upon these supernatural forces to aid them in their living. And religious leaders that could do this well held positions of respect and authority within Native American culture. You also have the difference in terms of gender relations. Most, not all, were matrilineal societies, meaning the woman made the basis of the family. So if a man and a woman had children, the children would become members of the woman's family, as opposed to Europe, they take on the husband's last name. Women played a major role in selecting the political leaders of the tribe. So one thing I really want to take away from this is that Native American society before 1492, was a very complex and rich set of cultures and people. Being Native American is not one thing. Native American culture is just as varied as Europe, Africa, and Asia. Different groups had different interactions with people from Eurasia and Africa. Not every Native American is going to have the same relationship with people from outside North and South America. In the next video, we're going to set up the context of Europe before 1492 as well. So I look forward to seeing you in that video. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for your time.